The automatic doors of the SaveMart slid open with a pneumatic hiss, releasing Sarah Mitchell into the damp October night. She was 32 years old, 5'6", 140 pounds of unremarkable presence wrapped in jeans, running shoes, and a plain gray hoodie that had seen better days. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, nothing that would make anyone look twice. She carried 2 plastic grocery bags, one in each hand, the weight distributed evenly. Milk, bread, pasta, the mundane architecture of ordinary life. It was 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the parking lot of the mid-sized shopping center stretched before her like a poorly lit stage, more shadows than substance. The sodium vapor lights created isolated pools of sickly yellow illumination, leaving vast territories of darkness between them. Sarah's Honda Civic sat 4 rows back, patient and anonymous among the scattered vehicles that marked other late-night shoppers' territories. The rain had just begun. That tentative drizzle that precedes a real storm, each drop catching the light as it fell, creating a shimmer in the air that would have been beautiful if she'd had time to appreciate it. She didn't. Sarah walked with a measured pace, not hurried, not dawdling, the kind of stride that suggested someone going somewhere without urgency or fear. But her eyes moved constantly. A subtle scanning pattern that took in everything. The white panel van, 3 spaces over, empty, no one inside, the sedan with its interior light on, where someone was checking their phone. The pickup truck, near the entrance where an elderly couple was loading bags. She catalogued exits, sight lines, blind spots, all without breaking stride or showing any sign that she was doing more than walking to her car. Her shoulders were relaxed, but her core engaged, balanced. Ready. Nothing in her posture screamed awareness or training, but everything about the way she moved through space suggested someone who understood exactly where she was and what surrounded her. The rain intensified slightly, pattering against the asphalt, creating that distinctive smell of water on warm pavement. Sarah shifted her right hand slightly, adjusting her grip on the grocery bag, keeping her dominant hand free enough to react if necessary. Still 3 rows from her car. Still scanning. Still processing. And that's when she registered them 5 figures clustered near the back corner of the lot. Voices carrying across the wet air, with that particular quality of men who'd been drinking and were looking for something, anything, to fill the void of a Tuesday night gone wrong. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just 1 click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. 12 hours earlier, Sarah had woken to her alarm at 6 a.m. in her modest 1-bedroom apartment, the kind of place that suggested someone living within their means without drawing attention either way. She'd made coffee, answered emails from her laptop at the kitchen table consulting work. She told anyone who asked corporate security assessments, travel schedules that explained her frequent absences. The cover was boring enough to discourage follow-up questions, detailed enough to withstand casual scrutiny. At 7:30 she'd stopped at the Corner Bean, the local coffee shop where the barista knew her as a regular but couldn't have described her 5 minutes after she left. "Morning, Sarah." "The usual?" "Please. And one of those blueberry muffins." "You got it." Transaction complete. Forgettable, exactly as intended. She'd worked from the shop for 2 hours, legitimately reviewing security protocols for a mid-sized firm, the kind of work that justified her credentials without revealing their true depth. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had caught her in the hallway around 11. "Oh, Sarah, could you help me with this package?" "Of course, Mrs. Patterson." She'd carried the box inside, accepted thanks with a smile, declined tea politely, disappeared back into her own space like water into sand. The gym session at 3 had been the only moment where her true capabilities approached the surface. The converted warehouse gym catered to serious athletes, which meant no one questioned when she deadlifted 220 pounds or worked the heavy bag with combinations that were perhaps too precise, too economical. But plenty of civilians trained hard, plenty of women were strong, and Sarah was careful to grunt appropriately, to show effort, to blend her efficiency into the spectrum of normal dedication. The evening had been paperwork, A phone call with her mother in Ohio discussing nothing of consequence, dinner that she'd forgotten to shop for, which brought her to SaveMart at 10:30 p.m. Now, back in the present, Sarah was 2 rows from her Civic, the bags growing heavier in the rain, and the 5 men were no longer clustered. They were spreading out, moving with that loose coordination of pack animals who'd identified potential prey, their voices louder, closer, deliberately so. She could see them clearly now in her peripheral vision 20 to 30 feet away, and angling to intercept her path. Their body language changing from aimless loitering to purposeful movement, and Sarah's internal calculator began running probabilities she'd hoped to avoid tonight. The leader was immediately identifiable by the way the others oriented around him, a gravitational center of aggression and entitlement. Jake Donnelly, though Sarah didn't know his name yet, stood 6'2" with the kind of build that came from prison yards rather than Jim's lean, ropey muscle under pale skin. Decorated with a sprawling collection of tattoos that climbed his neck and disappeared under his sleeveless shirt, despite the October chill. He was 28, holding a beer bottle by the neck like a club, his shaved head gleaming under the parking lot lights. His second, Marcus Chen, was 5'9" and built like a fire hydrant, stocky and solid. 25 years old, with aggressive energy radiating from every movement. He wore a leather jacket and kept his hands in his pockets, but his shoulders were hunched forward, ready, looking for an outlet for whatever rage powered him through Tuesday nights. The other 3 formed a supporting cast of varying threat levels. One was tall and skinny, early 20s, with nervous energy and acne scars, holding a liquor bottle in a paper bag. Another was heavyset, older, maybe 35, with the blank eyes of someone who'd stopped thinking years ago and just followed. The 5th was average height, average build, forgettable except for the way he kept laughing too loud at things that weren't funny. Alcohol courage overriding whatever common sense he'd been born with. They were passing bottles, voices carrying across the wet pavement, crude jokes about women and violence, and perceived slights from people who weren't there to defend themselves. The alpha posturing was constant. Jake making pronouncements, Marcus enforcing them with aggressive nods, the others laughing on cue like a pack of hyenas who'd forgotten they were scavengers playing at being lions. Then Jake saw her. His head turned, tracking Sarah's movement across the lot, and his posture changed immediately, chest puffing out, shoulders rolling back. "Hey Marcus, look what we got here." Marcus turned, grinned. "Little late for shopping, sweetheart." The comment carried across 30 feet of wet asphalt. Sarah continued walking, her pace unchanged, but her tactical computer was already processing. Distance to her car, 40 feet. Distance to thugs, 28 feet. And closing. Nearest exit from lot, 70 feet behind her. Potential weapons in environment. Her car keys, the bottles they were holding, a shopping cart 15 feet to her left, the bags in her hands weighted with canned goods, sight lines. Open, exposed, no cover. Potential for civilian interference. Low. Lot nearly empty. Threat assessment. Escalating, alcohol-fueled. Group dynamics amplifying individual aggression. She kept walking, keys already positioned between her fingers in her right hand, grocery bag hanging from that wrist, left hand still carrying the second bag but ready to drop it. Not paranoia. Preparation. They were moving to intercept now, spreading into a loose formation. And Jake was smiling like he'd just found tonight's entertainment. They moved with the lazy confidence of predators who'd never met anything that fought back, fanning out in a crescent that cut off the direct line to her Civic. Sarah reached her car, but they were already there. Jake positioning himself between her and the driver's door. Marcus to her left near the hood, the others spreading to cover her flanks and rear. Textbook encirclement. Though they probably didn't think of it in those terms. Jake leaned against her car, making it his, the beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "Where you headed in such a hurry, baby? Party's just getting started." His voice was thick with alcohol and assumption, eyes traveling over her body with the kind of entitlement that expected compliance. Sarah stopped 6 feet away, far enough to create reaction space, close enough to appear non-confrontational. She set down both grocery bags carefully, freeing her hands while appearing to simply adjust her load. Her voice, when she spoke, was level, calm, almost apologetic, the vocal equivalent of lowered threat displays. "Gentlemen, I'm just trying to get home. I don't want any trouble." The smile she offered was small, submissive, exactly what they expected. "Please, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me get to my car." They laughed. Marcus slapped his thigh like she'd told the funniest joke he'd heard all week. "She's polite, Jake. Real polite. Probably asks permission before she pisses." "Well-mannered women are hard to find," Jake said, pushing off her car, taking a step closer. "Maybe we should get to know each other better. Have a drink with us." Sarah's eyes tracked everything, while her face remained pleasant, unthreatening. Exit routes. Blocked on 3 sides. Only retreat available behind her, but that led away from her vehicle and deeper into the lot. Weapons visible. Jake's beer bottle could be used as a club or broken for cutting. Marcus had something bulging in his right jacket pocket, rectangular, possibly a knife handle. The skinny one on her left, she could see it now clearly. A folding knife clipped to his belt, blade side showing maybe 3 inches. Environmental advantages. Her back was to open space, theirs to vehicles. Limited their movement slightly. Her training wanted her to create distance, establish superior position, but that would signal awareness they didn't know she had. Still hoping they'd take the out she was offering, still hoping this could end without violence. "I really need to get home," she said, keeping her voice soft, apologetic. "I have work early tomorrow. I'm sure you understand." The skinny one laughed. "She's got work. Jake, she's got work." Jake smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. He reached down, and when his hand came back up, there was a knife in it. 4 inches of steel catching the parking lot lights. And Sarah's internal assessment shifted from yellow to red, threat level escalating, time running out on peaceful resolution. The semicircle tightened, 5 men forming a loose perimeter that closed off her escape routes with brutal efficiency. They were 3 feet closer now, well within striking distance, and the energy had shifted from predatory interest to active threat. Marcus stepped forward, emboldened by group dynamics and alcohol. "Come on, don't be like that. We're just being friendly. Real friendly." His hand reached for her, fingers extended toward her arm, contact imminent. Sarah moved. It was supposed to be a sidestep. Something normal. Something any woman might do to avoid unwanted touch. But her body executed it with fluid precision that spoke of 10,000 repetitions, weight transferring smoothly, hips rotating, feet placing with exact spacing, balance never compromised. She was suddenly 18 inches to the left, and Marcus's hand closed on empty air. The movement was too clean, too economical. Practiced. They noticed. Jake's eyes narrowed slightly, some predator instinct registering that the prey had moved wrong, but he processed it through the lens of expectation and alcohol and misread it entirely. "Oh, we got a feisty one." "You like to play, sweetheart?" The comments escalated, crude suggestions becoming explicit threats. The kind of things men say when they've decided consequences don't exist. Sarah stood centered in her space, and when she spoke again her voice had changed. Dropped half an octave, carrying an edge they should have recognized, but didn't. "You need to walk away. Right now. I'm asking you one more time." The please was gone. The apologetic tone had evaporated. What remained was flat. Authoritative. The vocal equivalent of a warning light they didn't have the education to read. Jake laughed and raised the knife, holding it at chest level. Blade pointed toward her. A threat display designed to intimidate, to make her comply through fear. He wasn't going to stab her, not yet. Just scare her into submission. Or what? You gonna call the cops? Scream? No one's around, baby. Just us and you. Sarah's internal assessment crystallized into certainty. Situation critical. De-escalation failed. 5 opponents. Alcohol-impaired judgment. Weapons present. Sexual violence implied. Lethal force authorized by their escalation. Civilians. None visible in immediate vicinity but possible in surrounding vehicles. If this moved, if they chased her, someone could get hurt. Better to contain it here. In this space. Now. Her stance shifted, subtle but fundamental. Weight settled differently, more evenly distributed. Her breathing slowed, deepened, oxygenating muscles that knew what was coming. Her hands came up in what still looked like a defensive gesture, but the angles were wrong, the positions too precise, and something in her eyes changed, went flat and calculating, and for just a second Jake felt something cold touch the base of his spine before his ego crushed it. Sarah's feet slid apart, 6 inches wider than before, her weight dropping fractionally lower, distributing across both legs in perfect balance, the kind of stance that could explode in any direction without telegraphing intent. Her hands rose higher, palms forward in what anyone watching would read as defensive, "Please don't hurt me" positioning. But her fingers were loose, ready, her elbows at precise angles that could convert to strikes or blocks in fractions of a second. This was the fighting position they drilled into her until her body could assume it in her sleep, disguised as civilian fear. Her voice dropped another register, something emerging that hadn't been there before, cold and flat and absolutely certain. "You should walk away. Right now." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request. It was a professional assessment delivered as fact, the vocal equivalent of a final warning before lethal force authorization, and they should have heard it, should have recognized the change in frequency, but they were too drunk, too committed, too stupid. They laughed harder. Marcus bent forward, slapping his knee, beer sloshing from his bottle. The skinny one wheezed. The heavy one grinned with his mouth open. Jake's smile widened and he moved closer, closing the distance to 4 feet. The knife coming up in what he probably thought was a threatening gesture. Blade catching the light. Rain beating on the steel. Sarah's eyes tracked it all. The knife in Jake's right hand, held incorrectly, thumb on top of the handle instead of wrapped around it. Telegraphing that he'd never been trained. Just carried it for show. Marcus to her left front, 10 o'clock position, 7 feet away, hands still in pockets, contained threat but mobile. Skinny, one at 8 o'clock, 9 feet, the knife on his belt still sheathed. Accessible in approximately 1.2 seconds, if he knew what he was doing, which he probably didn't. Heavy one at 2 o'clock, 8 feet, hands empty, slow moving, lowest priority. Average build laughing guy at 4 o'clock, 10 feet, also empty-handed. Compromised by alcohol. Delayed reaction time. Primary threat. Jake, with blade, 3.5 feet, and closing. Secondary threat. Marcus, likely armed. Escape routes for potential civilians. North toward store entrance, 60 feet clear. Her breathing remained controlled. 4 counts in through her nose, 4 counts out through her mouth. Autonomous nervous system regulation that kept her heart rate at 68 beats per minute, despite the adrenaline her body was producing. Sympathetic nervous system primed but controlled. Years of training, overriding millions of years of evolution. Fear response channeled into calculation and precision. Jake took another step. 2.8 feet now, well inside her reaction envelope. And he raised the knife higher, and something in Sarah's eyes went completely flat. Marcus made his move from her left flank, a lunging grab designed to pin her arms, while Jake controlled her attention with the knife. Basic pack tactics that would have worked on someone untrained. He came in fast, hands reaching for her shoulders. 200 pounds of momentum behind the attack, confident in his mass and speed. Sarah saw it coming before he moved, read it in the shift of his weight, the rotation of his shoulders, the way his hands started to emerge from his pockets. When he committed, she was already responding. Her left arm coming up not to block but to redirect. Hand catching his right wrist, her body pivoting at the hips, using the rotation to guide his momentum past her rather than against her. Elementary jiu-jitsu principle applied with surgical precision. Marcus stumbled forward, his own speed and weight betraying him. And his face registered surprise as he realized he was moving in a direction he hadn't intended. Off balance. Control lost. He caught himself after 3 staggering steps, turning back toward her, and the surprise was shifting into confusion because that shouldn't have happened. He was stronger, heavier, and she'd barely seemed to touch him. The others paused. Their loose formation hesitating, some animal instinct recognizing that the mathematics of the situation had just revealed variables they hadn't accounted for. Sarah remained centered, balanced, her stance unchanged, hands still up in that deceptive ready position. And she wasn't pursuing Marcus, wasn't pressing any advantage, just standing there giving them space to recalculate, to make better choices. Jake's face flushed red, ego and alcohol mixing into combustible humiliation. His boy had just been handled by a 140-pound woman in front of the crew, which meant his authority was being questioned, his dominance challenged, and that could not stand. He stepped forward aggressively, the knife shifting from intimidation display to actual threat posture, blade angled forward, his body squared to her, and his voice came out harsh and ugly. "You think you're smart? Think you're tough?" Sarah's tactical computer updated its assessment. Primary threat. Jake armed with blade, emotionally compromised, ego investment overriding judgment, will escalate to maintain status. Secondary threats. Marcus recovering, likely to support immediately. Others will follow leader's cue. Lethal force authorized by weapons and numbers. Physical harm imminent. But still, some part of her that remained Sarah Mitchell, the consultant, the neighbor who helped Mrs. Patterson, the woman who ordered the usual at Corner Bean, that part hoped they'd read the situation correctly, recognize they were outmatched, and choose survival over pride. The rain intensified, shifting from drizzle to steady downpour, each drop catching the sodium vapor lights and creating a shimmering curtain between Sarah and the 5 men. The asphalt gleamed wet and black, reflecting the yellow lights in distorted pools that made the parking lot look like some noir film set, all shadow and uncertainty and violence waiting to happen. Water ran down Sarah's face, plastered her hoodie to her shoulders. But she didn't wipe it away, didn't blink, didn't move at all. She stood centered in her space, balanced on the balls of her feet, completely still in a way that transcended normal human stillness. The kind of motionless that apex predators achieve before they strike, every muscle fiber ready but not tense. Breathing so controlled, it was barely visible. And something about that stillness was fundamentally wrong. The thugs felt it, that primitive hindbrain alarm that had kept their ancestors alive on the savannah. The recognition that prey didn't stand like this, didn't look at you like this, didn't radiate this kind of coiled potential energy. Marcus shifted his weight uncertainly. The skinny one's laugh died in his throat. Even the heavy one stopped grinning, some deeper instinct recognizing danger even if his conscious mind couldn't process it. But pride is a powerful drug, and numbers provide false courage, and they'd already committed in front of each other, established their intent, and backing down now would mean losing face, admitting they'd been scared off by one woman. Jake couldn't allow that, wouldn't allow that. So he doubled down, made his voice harder, cruder. "We're gonna teach you some manners, teach you what happens to bitches who don't know their place." The average build one, emboldened by his leader's commitment, started moving, circling to Sarah's right, trying to get behind her. Basic flanking maneuver. Sarah's head didn't move, didn't turn to track him, but her eyes shifted fractionally, and her peripheral vision, trained and enhanced through years of combat drills, picked him up perfectly at 4 o'clock, then 5 o'clock, tracking his movement through the full 360 degrees of awareness that special operations training had burned into her neural pathways. Her internal computer was running constant calculations now, updating every half-second with new data. 5 opponents in modified encirclement, primary threat forward with blade, secondary threat left front, likely armed. 3 supporting elements establishing perimeter control. 1 weapon confirmed visible, statistical probability of additional concealed weapons at 73% based on demographics and behavior patterns. Confined space, vehicles limiting movement options for all parties. Rain reducing traction coefficient by approximately 30%, requiring adjustment to footwork and stance transitions. Her hands shifted fractionally, angles adjusting by millimeters that would mean everything when the violence started, and the rain kept falling, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, and 5 men who didn't know any better thought they still controlled this situation. Jake committed. His shoulder dipped slightly, telegraphing the attack a full half-second before his arm moved. Weight shifting forward onto his front foot, the knife coming around in a wide slashing arc aimed at her throat, the kind of attack you learned in prison yards or street fights. All aggression and no technique, designed to intimidate and maim rather than kill efficiently. To Jake, moving at normal speed, it was fast, sudden, decisive. To Sarah, her perception dilated by adrenaline and 10,000 hours of training, the world downshifted into crystalline slow motion. Every detail sharp and processable. She saw the wind-up in his scapula, the rotation of his torso, the trajectory of the blade before it even began moving, the pattern recognition systems honed through endless repetitions, identifying the attack vector and optimal countermeasures simultaneously. Her body moved before her conscious mind finished analyzing. Muscle memory executing protocols burned so deep they'd become reflex. She stepped forward and to the left, inside the arc of the slash, moving into the threat rather than away from it, closing distance to where the blade had no leverage, no speed, no power. Her right hand came up in a precise strike, the blade of her palm impacting Jake's wrist at the exact moment of maximum extension, hitting the nerve cluster and pressure point with surgical accuracy. The knife flew from his suddenly nerveless fingers, spinning through the rain-filled air, catching light as it rotated, and clattered onto the wet asphalt with a metallic ring that echoed across the parking lot. The disarm had taken 0.7 seconds, textbook perfect, the kind of technique they drilled into Delta operators until it was automatic, reliable, repeatable. Jake stood there, arm still extended, hand empty, his face frozen in confusion as his brain tried to process what had just happened. Sarah could have pressed the attack, could have followed the disarm with a strike to his throat or temple, could have disabled him completely in the 2 seconds he stood vulnerable and shocked, but she didn't. She stepped back, creating distance again, her hands coming up in that ready position, and her voice cut through the rain one final time. Last chance. Leave now. The knife skittered across the wet pavement, pushed by rain and gravity, sliding under a nearby pickup truck. Gone. For one suspended moment, the possibility existed that they'd recognize reality. Accept the loss. Retreat with whatever dignity remained. But Jake's face was purple with rage and humiliation, his disarmed hand curling into a fist, and Marcus was already moving, and the others were feeding off the group energy. Embarrassment and alcohol and pride mixing into something that overrode survival instinct. All 5 of them started closing in simultaneously, the semicircle collapsing, and Sarah's last hope for a peaceful resolution evaporated into the October rain. The 3 secondary thugs came in together, uncoordinated, driven by mob courage and the assumption that numbers meant victory. The skinny one reached her first, hands extended to grab. No guard, no defense, just forward momentum and bad intentions. Sarah's training took over completely. Delta Force, close quarters combat protocols, executing with mechanical precision, and the civilized consultant from apartment 4B disappeared entirely. Her right elbow snapped up and forward, driving into the skinny one's solar plexus with 40 pounds of force concentrated into 2 square inches of impact point, hitting the nerve cluster behind the sternum. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. His diaphragm spasmed, breathing stopped, and he dropped like someone had cut his strings, folding around the impact point, gasping soundlessly for air that wouldn't come and out of the fight before his brain registered what had happened. 1 second elapsed. The heavy one was coming from her left, slower, telegraphing a wide haymaker that would have been devastating if it connected. It didn't. Sarah rotated her hips, chambered her right leg, and drove her knee into his left thigh, targeting the common peroneal nerve and muscle belly, a mobility kill designed to compromise the leg without causing permanent damage. The heavy one's leg went dead instantly. Nerve function interrupted, and he stumbled, his punch missing by 2 feet, his face registering shock as his body stopped obeying commands. 2 seconds elapsed. The average build one had circled behind and was lunging forward, trying to wrap her up in a bear hug, arms spread wide, completely overextended. Sarah dropped her weight fractionally, let him commit, then exploded upward. her right palm driving up under his chin in a perfect strike. Heel of her hand impacting the mandible with precise force and angle. His head snapped back, teeth clicking together, eyes losing focus as his brain bounced off the inside of his skull, not unconscious but dazed, stumbling backward with his hands going to his face. 3 seconds elapsed. 3 men disabled. 3 efficient, economical strikes. Each one targeted at specific vulnerabilities, measured force appropriate to the threat. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive, movements flowing like water from one target to the next. Her body operating on autopilot built from thousands of hours of repetition. Marcus and Jake stood frozen, the collapsing semicircle suddenly a tableau of groaning, disabled men, and something in their faces changed as reality crashed through the alcohol and ego and false assumptions. They weren't facing a victim. They'd cornered a professional, and the predator-prey dynamic had just inverted completely. Marcus charged with a roar that was half rage, half fear, his right arm cocking back for a massive haymaker, putting everything he had into one desperate punch designed to end this before he had to process what he was actually facing. The punch came in wide and hard, loaded with 200 pounds of body weight, and it would have shattered bone if it had connected. Sarah slipped it. Her head moved 4 inches to the left. The fist passing so close, she felt the air displacement. And while Marcus was fully extended, completely committed, all his momentum carrying forward with nothing to stop it. She caught his wrist with both hands, stepped to the side, and used basic physics against him. His own speed and weight became weapons turned against their owner. She guided his momentum, added rotational force, and drove him face first into the hood of her Honda Civic. The impact was tremendous. Marcus's face hitting the metal with enough force to dent it inward. The entire car rocking on its suspension, alarm system triggering with a brief bleat before the impact jarred it silent again. Marcus slid down the hood, leaving a smear of blood from his nose, his legs buckling, hands scrabbling uselessly at wet metal, and he collapsed in a groaning heap at the front wheel, semi-conscious and out of the fight. Jake was backing up, hands moving fast, reaching behind his back, and Sarah saw it with perfect clarity, the black polymer grip emerging from his waistband at the small of his back, concealed carry, and her threat assessment spiked from red to critical. Because firearms changed everything, extended his kill range from arm's length to 50 feet, made him lethal despite his lack of training. She moved before he could clear the weapon, closing 8 feet in less than 2 seconds, her right hand shooting out to trap his wrist as the gun came around. Her fingers locking on like steel bands, controlling the weapon's direction, so the muzzle pointed harmlessly skyward. Her left hand came up simultaneously, palm striking his elbow joint from the side, hyperextending it with controlled force. Not breaking it but compromising the joint's structural integrity, muscles and tendons stretching beyond their tolerance. Jake's hand spasmed open, and the gun dropped, a compact 9mm that hit the wet pavement with a heavy clunk. Sarah's right leg swept through his ankles, a basic takedown executed with professional precision, and Jake's feet went out from under him. His body falling hard onto the rain-slicked asphalt, his head bouncing once with a sound that made the remaining conscious thugs wince. She kicked the gun, her foot connecting solidly, sending it spinning and sliding across the parking lot, where it disappeared under a Toyota Camry. 3 spaces away. Irretrievable. Neutralized. Jake lay on his back, rain falling on his face, cradling his hyperextended arm, staring up at Sarah with dawning horror and the kind of understanding that comes too late to matter. 30 seconds. From first contact to complete neutralization, 30 seconds had elapsed, and the parking lot looked like a battlefield painted in civilian clothes and rainwater. All 5 men were down or incapacitated, distributed across 20 feet of wet asphalt in various states of distress and comprehension. Sarah stood in the center of it all, balanced and alert, her breathing still controlled at the same measured pace. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Her heart rate elevated to maybe 90 beats per minute, but nowhere near the red line. No visible strain on her face, no trembling in her hands. Her hoodie was wet from rain but otherwise undisturbed. Ponytail still intact, not even breathing hard, looking like someone who'd just finished a moderate workout, rather than dismantling 5 attackers in half a minute. The skinny one, the first she'd dropped, was still on his knees. Hands clutched to his solar plexus, making small, desperate wheezing sounds as his diaphragm slowly remembered how to function, tears and rain mixing on his face as he struggled to pull air into lungs that had forgotten the process. The heavy one sat on the ground, both hands wrapped around his dead left leg, trying to massage feeling back into muscles that weren't responding, his face pale with shock and the dawning realization that his body had betrayed him, that some woman had touched his leg. And now, it wouldn't work. Marcus was slumped against her Civic's front wheel, semi-conscious, blood streaming from his nose and mixing with rainwater, groaning in a continuous low tone that suggested concussion protocols would be necessary, his earlier aggressive energy completely extinguished. Jake lay flat on his back where she'd put him, rain falling directly into his eyes, but he wasn't blinking, just staring up at Sarah with an expression that had moved beyond horror into existential terror, cradling his hyperextended arm against his chest, finally understanding exactly how outmatched he'd been, how every assumption he'd made had been catastrophically wrong. The average build one sat dazed 10 feet away, touching his face gingerly, jaw working experimentally, checking for broken bones or loose teeth, eyes unfocused, still processing the palm strike that had rattled his brain and rewritten his understanding of violence. The rain continued falling, steady and cold, washing away nothing. Sarah's eyes moved constantly, scanning the parking lot for additional threats, checking the perimeter, cataloging every vehicle, every shadow, every potential danger. Her hands remained ready, her stance balanced, still operational, still engaged. Because threat assessment didn't end until you were secure. She looked at each man in turn, running medical evaluations with the clinical precision of someone trained in combat casualty care. Solar plexus strike. Painful. Temporarily incapacitating. Full recovery expected in 2 to 3 minutes. No permanent damage. Dead leg, nerve disruption, temporary paralysis. Full function returns in 5 to 15 minutes. No lasting injury. Mandibular strike. Possible mild concussion. Jaw function intact. No broken bones detected. Monitor for worsening symptoms. Vehicle impact. Definite concussion. Probable nasal fracture. Possible facial contusions. Requires medical evaluation. Hyperextended elbow. Soft tissue damage. No fracture detected. Painful but functional. Ice and immobilization recommended. None of them were critically injured. All were disabled. Mission accomplished with appropriate force, and Sarah reached slowly for her phone. Jake's voice came out strained, cracked, barely above a whisper but carrying across the rain-soaked pavement with the weight of genuine confusion and fear. What the hell are you?" Sarah didn't answer. She pulled her phone from her pocket with her left hand, her right still free and positioned, maintaining readiness even as she shifted into the next operational phase. She dialed 911, brought the phone to her ear, and when the dispatcher answered, her voice changed completely, dropping into a crisp, professional cadence that belonged to radio communications and military brevity codes. "This is a civilian reporting an assault. 5 suspects attempted armed robbery and assault. All suspects neutralized and contained. No civilian injuries. Location is SaveMart parking lot, 4750 Riverside Avenue, southeast corner near the loading zone. Suspects are injured and will require medical evaluation. I am a trained responder and remaining on scene." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when the dispatcher responded, her voice had shifted too, recognizing something in Sarah's tone, in the terminology, in the way information was packaged and delivered. "Ma'am, are you law enforcement?" "Negative. Federal contractor with medical training. I'm secure and maintaining scene control. Do you need medical assistance?" "Negative. Suspects will need evaluation. I'm providing assessment now." Sarah's eyes moved over each man as she spoke, clinical and detached, listing injuries with the methodical precision of someone who'd done combat casualty assessments in significantly worse circumstances. Suspect 1. Blunt force trauma to solar plexus. Respiratory distress. Recovering. Suspect 2. Contusion to common peroneal nerve. Temporary mobility impairment. Suspect 3. Blunt force trauma to mandible. Possible mild concussion. Suspect 4. Facial impact trauma. Probable nasal fracture. Definite concussion. Requires immediate evaluation. Suspect 5. Hyperextended elbow joint, soft tissue damage, armed suspect, weapon secured. The thugs were listening now, those conscious enough to process language, hearing the medical precision, the military terminology creeping into her speech, the casual competence of someone assessing damage they'd inflicted with the same tone you'd use to inventory office supplies. Jake's face had gone white. Marcus was staring at her with something approaching religious terror, and the skinny one had stopped trying to breathe and started trying to understand. They'd cornered someone in a parking lot, made assumptions based on gender and size and the hour of night. And what they'd actually cornered was something else entirely, something trained and lethal and professional, and they were only alive because she'd chosen to let them live. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, that distinctive Doppler shift marking their approach through city streets. Maybe 6 blocks away and closing fast. Sarah remained exactly where she was, centered in her space between her dented Civic and the scattered bodies, eyes moving in constant rotation, watching all 5 men for any sign of recovery, any attempt at secondary aggression, any threat reassertion. Her stance hadn't relaxed. Her hands were still ready. Operational protocols still running because the fight wasn't over until you were secure and extracted. None of them tried anything. The survival instinct that ego and alcohol had suppressed for 30 fatal seconds had finally broken through, overriding pride and posturing with the fundamental mammalian understanding that they were prey, not predators, and the best strategy for prey was to stay very, very still. The skinny one had curled into a semi-fetal position, still clutching his chest. The heavy one stared at his useless leg like it belonged to someone else. Marcus had stopped groaning and was just breathing, eyes closed, afraid to move. The average-build one sat frozen, hands still on his face. Jake remained on his back, arm cradled, staring at her. And then the youngest one, the average-build guy she'd palm-struck. His voice came out, shaking, breaking, stripped of all the bravado that had brought him here. "I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. We didn't. We're sorry." Sarah's expression didn't change, didn't soften, didn't acknowledge the apology beyond a fractional movement of her eyes to confirm he wasn't moving. Sorry didn't undo choices. Didn't reverse the moment they'd pulled weapons and made threats. Didn't change the fact that they'd tried to hurt someone and found out. She was thinking about what came next. The cascade of consequences this 30-second engagement would trigger. Police reports, witness statements, evidence documentation. Questions about training, background, capabilities. Possible revelation of her cover identity, compromising the consultant facade she'd maintained for 8 months. Her commander would need to be notified. Threat assessment would be conducted. She might be relocated, reassigned. The whole carefully constructed civilian life disrupted because 5 drunk idiots couldn't leave a woman alone in a parking lot. For a moment, she considered the alternative, considered simply leaving, letting them scatter, avoiding the complications entirely. She could be gone before the sirens arrived, and these men had learned their lesson in the most visceral way possible. But she rejected the thought immediately. They'd made choices, escalated to lethal force with knife and gun, threatened violence with the kind of casual cruelty that suggested this wasn't their first time. If she let them go, they'd do it again. To someone else. Someone without her training, and that blood would be on her hands. No, they'd chosen this path, and consequences were how lessons became permanent. The police cars turned into the parking lot entrance, 3 vehicles. Lights painting the rain-soaked scene in alternating red and blue. And Sarah stood ready to explain exactly what they'd find. 4 police cars converged on the parking lot, 8 officers deploying with practiced efficiency, taking standard felony stop positions with weapons holstered but hands ready, eyes scanning for active threats. The lead vehicle belonged to Sergeant Michael Davis, 22 years on the force. A man who'd seen enough violence to recognize its aftermath and enough liars to smell deception at 50 yards. He stepped out of his cruiser and took in the scene with the kind of comprehensive sweep that came from 2 decades of translating chaos into reports. 5 men down or sitting, various states of injury and distress, distributed across 20 feet of wet asphalt. 1 woman standing in the approximate center, medium build, civilian clothes, utterly calm, hands visible at her sides, no signs of injury, no defensive wounds, no torn clothing. The math didn't add up. Davis's instincts tingled, that cop's sixth sense that came from pattern recognition and survival training, because something about this picture was fundamentally off. Victims didn't stand like that, didn't maintain that kind of centered balance, didn't have that quality of controlled readiness in their posture. She was standing like someone who'd controlled the situation, not survived it. "Secure the scene," Davis ordered, and his officers moved in, practiced choreography of separation and assessment. 2 went to the injured men, checking for weapons, calling for EMS. 2 more established a perimeter. 1 approached Sarah with appropriate caution, professional distance maintained. "Ma'am? Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Sarah's hands remained visible, non-threatening, but she didn't adopt the body language of someone seeking protection or comfort. "I'm uninjured. I'm the one who called 911. These men attempted to assault me. I defended myself." Her voice was level, precise, no trembling, no emotional overflow, just information delivered cleanly. The thugs were babbling now. Marcus recovered enough to speak, his voice thick from his broken nose. "She attacked us, man. Came at us crazy, unprovoked. We were just standing here." Jake joined in, cradling his arm. "We didn't do nothing. She's psycho, martial arts freak or something." The skinny one was crying, words tumbling out incoherently about being jumped. Crazy bitch. They were victims. Davis listened to it all with the expression of a man who'd heard every lie the human mind could construct and wasn't impressed by any of them. His eyes kept returning to Sarah, who stood silent, waiting, not defending herself, not arguing, not reacting, just present and patient, and that patience spoke volumes to someone who knew what to listen for. Davis moved toward Sarah directly, his hand gesturing to separate her from the scene, professional distance established. "Ma'am, let's step over here for a moment." He positioned them near the hood of his cruiser, lights still flashing, creating a bubble of semi-privacy in the chaos. His notepad came out, pen ready, standard protocol engaging. "Are you injured in any way? Any pain, any contact?" "Negative. No injury sustained." The word choice registered immediately. Negative, not no. Sustained, not received. Davis's cop radar pinged again. "Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Sarah's response was precise, structured, complete sentences with relevant details only. No emotional coloring, no speculation. "I exited the store at approximately 2,245 hours. 5 male subjects were loitering in the southeast section of the lot. As I approached my vehicle, they moved to intercept. Subject 1 made verbal threats of a sexual nature. I attempted verbal de-escalation. Subject 1 displayed a knife. Subject 5 drew a firearm. Subjects initiated physical contact. I defended myself using appropriate force. All subjects were neutralized without lethal force. I called 911 immediately after securing the scene." Davis wrote it down, but he was hearing more than the words. Military time, tactical terminology, force continuum language, threat assessment protocols. This wasn't how civilians described fights, even trained ones. This was how soldiers debriefed operations. Military bearing? Definitely. Combat veteran? Probably. Special operations? Possibly. "Do you have identification, ma'am?" Sarah hesitated, and in that hesitation, Davis saw calculation, risk assessment, decision trees being evaluated in real time. Then her voice dropped lower, more confidential. "Sergeant, I need you to contact a number. I'll give you a verification code. They'll provide identification confirmation." Davis's expression changed, his eyebrows rising fractionally. "Federal. Had to be. CIA, FBI, maybe something more specialized." She wasn't asking permission, wasn't requesting, was calmly and authoritatively telling him the protocol that would be followed, and her tone carried the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed in critical situations. He pulled out his phone, nodded for her to continue. Sarah recited a number from memory, followed by an alphanumeric code that meant nothing to Davis, but clearly meant everything to whoever would answer. Davis walked 15 feet away, made the call, his voice low and professional. Sarah waited, hands still visible, posture unchanged, knowing exactly what was coming, knowing the next 10 minutes would determine whether her cover survived the night or whether Sarah Mitchell, the consultant, would disappear and require complete reconstruction somewhere else. 10 minutes later, 2 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. No lights, no sirens, just dark vehicles with tinted windows that screamed federal authority. 4 men emerged, 2 from each vehicle, wearing suits that were too tactical to be business, too expensive to be standard government issue. They moved with the same economical precision Sarah had displayed, and when they produced credentials for Davis, the words Joint Special Operations Command were visible even from a distance. Davis walked over to meet them, and they had a conversation in voices too low to carry. Positioned away from the other officers, away from the thugs, away from everyone, Sarah watched from where she stood, knowing exactly what was being said, knowing exactly how this played out. One of the men gestured toward her, said something, and Davis's eyes widened visibly even in the flashing police lights, his head turning to look at Sarah with an expression that had moved from respect to something approaching awe. He asked a question. The federal agent nodded, said something else, and Davis's entire posture changed, straightening, like he'd just been told he was standing in the presence of someone who existed in an entirely different category of dangerous. The lead fed, a man in his 40s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in classified spaces, walked over to Sarah. His voice was quiet, professional, clipped. "Captain." "Status?" "Contained, sir." "Social situation? Self-defense? No operational connection." "Cover compromised?" "Partially." "Local law enforcement only." "Assess it as containable." "Need extraction?" Sarah shook her head. "Negative. I can manage reintegration." He studied her for 3 seconds, running his own assessment, then nodded. "Understood. Report filed. Your CO will contact you within 6 hours. Maintain cover where possible." He glanced at the 5 men being tended to by paramedics. Restrained response. "Well done." Then he and his team were gone, back into the SUVs, disappearing into the night as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving no trace except the knowledge in Davis's head that would probably keep him awake tonight. Davis walked back to Sarah, and his entire demeanor had transformed. The way civilians changed when they learned you'd been somewhere that required security clearances they didn't have words for. "Captain Mitchell?" Sarah nodded once, simple acknowledgement. Davis's voice was quieter now, carrying a weight of understanding. "They didn't tell me details, but I know what JSOC is. I know what it means." He glanced at the thugs. "Delta Force doesn't officially have women, or didn't, but I read the papers. I know things changed." Sarah said nothing, neither confirming nor denying, and Davis respected the silence. He looked at Jake, at Marcus, at the 3 others who'd thought they were predators. These men don't know how lucky they are. Davis handled the situation with efficient authority, his orders crisp and unambiguous. The paramedics had assessed and stabilized the 5 men, none requiring immediate hospitalization but all needing follow-up care. Davis's officers moved in with handcuffs, reading rights in voices that carried no sympathy. "You're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, attempted armed robbery, brandishing a firearm." The charges kept coming as each man was cuffed and processed. Jake, with his hyperextended elbow, had to be cuffed in front, special accommodation for injury. Marcus's broken nose had been packed with gauze, his face already swelling into purple and black. The skinny one could finally breathe normally but was still hunched over protectively. They were being loaded into separate patrol cars, standard procedure for multiple suspects. When Jake found his voice, asking the officer who was guiding him into the back seat, desperation cracking through. "Who is she? What the hell is she?" The officer, a younger patrolman named Rodriguez, glanced over at Davis, who was standing 30 feet away. Davis caught the look, considered for 2 seconds, then gave a subtle nod. Just the slightest dip of his chin. Permission granted. Rodriguez leaned in close to Jake, voice low but clear enough that Marcus in the adjacent car could hear, and the others being loaded nearby caught fragments. "Someone way out of your league. Delta Force operator. You picked the wrong woman." The color drained from Jake's face so fast it looked like someone had opened a valve, his skin going from flush to corpse pale in seconds, his eyes widening with the kind of existential horror that comes from understanding you've made a mistake so catastrophic it defies comprehension. Marcus, hearing it, bent forward and vomited onto the pavement between his feet. The reality of what they'd done crashing through his consciousness like a freight train. The youngest one, the average-build guy who'd apologized, started crying in earnest now, not the tears of pain but of genuine terror and comprehension, his body shaking as he was guided into a car. The heavy one just sat where the paramedics had left him, staring at nothing, his dead leg still not responding, his mind trying to process that they'd cornered, threatened, and attacked one of the most elite soldiers in the world. Someone trained to kill terrorists and enemy combatants, and she'd let them live. Jake turned his head, staring through the rain and the flashing lights at Sarah, who stood with Davis giving her formal statement, her voice carrying that same precise military cadence, documenting every detail with professional detachment, timestamps and positions, and threat assessments flowing in complete sentences. Impersonal and clinical, and Jake understood with perfect clarity that in her world, in her training, in her capabilities, he and his friends had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience on a Tuesday night. 2 hours later, the parking lot was nearly empty again. The chaos collapsed back into ordinary urban night. The ambulances had left, the patrol cars had departed with their cargo of arrested men. The evidence technicians had photographed and documented everything, and the rain had finally stopped, leaving the asphalt gleaming black under the sodium lights. Davis walked Sarah back to her Civic, their footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet, and the dented hood caught the light like a battle scar, the impression of Marcus's face still visible in the crumpled metal. Davis stopped, looked at the damage, then at Sarah. "You showed restraint, serious restraint." His voice carried professional respect, one operator to another, different uniforms but same understanding. "You could have killed them all in that time? 30 seconds? With your training?" Sarah shrugged, her hands in her hoodie pockets now, the adrenaline long since metabolized, back to looking like someone ordinary. Wasn't necessary. They were idiots, not terrorists. Drunk, stupid, dangerous, but not enemy combatants. Different rules apply. Davis nodded slowly, processing that distinction, the discipline it required to maintain that separation. "Does this happen often? People not knowing what you are?" "Usually my awareness prevents situations from developing to this point," Sarah said, glancing back at where it had happened, already analyzing what she could have done differently. "I see trouble forming. I extract before it crystallizes. Tonight they were drunk and committed before I could disengage without drawing more attention. Sometimes extraction creates more problems than containment." "The knife and the gun," Davis said. "Those were lethal threats. You were authorized to use lethal force." Sarah nodded. "I was. But there's an escalation ladder, even for me, maybe especially for me. Minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat. They were incapacitated, so the mission was complete. Killing them would have been excessive, operationally unnecessary, and created complications nobody needed." She paused, meeting his eyes. "My training is for enemies. These were just criminals. There's a difference." Davis respected that, respected the discipline and judgment it represented, the kind of fire control that separated professionals from killers. He extended his hand and Sarah shook it, firm grip, mutual acknowledgement. "Thank you for not making a mess I'd have to explain. 5 bodies would have been a lot of paperwork." Sarah smiled slightly, the first real expression she'd shown all night. "You're welcome, Sergeant. Sorry about the paperwork you do have." Davis laughed, shook his head, stepped back. "Worth it to see those idiots learn something. Drive safe, Captain." And he walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her dented car and the quiet night. Sarah drove home through streets still wet from rain, the Civic's dented hood a reminder with every traffic light that caught the damage in its glow. Her hands were steady on the wheel, her mind processing the night with the methodical efficiency of an after-action review. Threat encountered, threat neutralized, collateral damage minimal. Mission parameters maintained. But beneath the tactical assessment ran a deeper current of thought about the two worlds she straddled: elite operator trained to kill America's enemies, and regular person trying to live quietly in a one-bedroom apartment where her biggest concern should be remembering to buy milk. She knew what came next. Reports would be filed, briefings conducted in rooms that didn't officially exist. Her commander would assess whether her cover was salvageable or if Sarah Mitchell, the consultant, needed to disappear. Reborn somewhere else with a different name and backstory, possibly relocation, possibly reassignment, possibly another 8 months building a civilian facade that could evaporate in 30 seconds. But she also knew she'd done it right. Made the correct calls under pressure, protected herself without excessive force, used training appropriately and proportionally. 5 men alive who could have been corpses that counted for something. At home, she made tea, chamomile, the mundane ritual of civilian life reclaiming space from operational mindset. She sat by the window watching the rain resume, droplets tracking down glass, the city beyond blurred and indistinct, and for a moment she was just tired, just human, just someone who wanted normal things. Her phone buzzed. Text from her commander, terse as always. "Heard? Clean?" She typed back with one hand, tea in the other. "Clean." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Good. Coffee Monday?" Sarah smiled slightly, genuine warmth breaking through professional distance. Monday meant debrief, meant decisions. But coffee meant he wasn't angry, meant she'd handled it acceptably, meant Sarah Mitchell might survive another day. Tomorrow she'd return to her cover life. Answer emails about security assessments. Get coffee at Corner Bean, where the barista wouldn't know anything had changed. Help Mrs. Patterson with packages, blend seamlessly back into ordinary existence. Tonight she was reminded why the training never stopped, why vigilance was constant, why some part of her would always be scanning exits and calculating threats even in the safest spaces. Some lives didn't get to be fully ordinary, didn't get to relax completely, didn't get to forget what they were underneath the civilian clothes and polite smiles. She'd made peace with that years ago, accepted the trade, chosen the path. The rain continued falling, washing away the night, and Sarah Mitchell, Captain, Delta Force operator, one of America's most elite soldiers, blended back into the civilian world like she was never anything else.